Welcome to 21st Sports. Week 2 is underway, and we had our second Sunday night football game of the season. This time it was the Green Bay Packers at the Minnesota Vikings, as these two NFC North Division rivals faced off in the first game played in the new stadium there in Minnesota. And before the game, we had Hall of Fame coach, one of the greatest coaches in the history of football. He had led the Vikings to 4 Super Bowls back in the 70s. Bud Grant blew the horn, and the crowd was going crazy. But it was a tight game on the field. Not a lot of scoring. A lot of defense, though. Really good defense on both teams. And usually you'd think you'd see more offense, especially out of Aaron Rodgers. And it almost looked like he might save the day, but not so fast. That Minnesota defense, they were playing like the Purple People Eaters. And we also got to see Sam Bradford play his first game under center in that purple uniform for the Minnesota Vikings. And he actually set a record for the most passing yards for a Minnesota quarterback in their first start. So that was kind of interesting to see Bradford get off to a good start there in Minnesota. Definitely always good to see people succeed, whether you're rooting for them or not. I always like to see people succeed. And in this game, though, the Packers got on the board first. Jordy Nelson scored courtesy of a 1-yard touchdown pass from Aaron Rodgers, and it was 7-0 Green Bay over Minnesota. Then in the second, the Vikings got on the board as Sam Bradford threw his first touchdown as a Minnesota Viking. That one went to Kyle Rudolph, the tight end, for an 8-yard touchdown pass, and this game was tied at 7 apiece. Blair Walsh would kick a 46-yard field goal with less than half a minute left in the first half, and it was 10-7. So that was the score at intermission as the Vikings took the lead for the first time in this game there late in the second quarter. Then in the third quarter, it was scoreless until with just over 2 minutes left in the third, Sam Bradford connected with Stephon Diggs for a 25-yard touchdown, and it was now a 10-point lead for Minnesota as Bradford threw his second touchdown of the day and his second touchdown as a Minnesota Viking. So 17-7 would be the score heading into the fourth quarter. Then early in the fourth, with just under 13 minutes left to play in this game, Aaron Rodgers would take it into the end zone himself with a 10-yard touchdown run, and we had a 3-point game with the score Minnesota 17, Green Bay 14. And at this point, you're thinking Aaron Rodgers is going to do it again. He's captain comeback. Nobody's more clutch than Rodgers, but wait a minute. As I said earlier, the Vikings were playing like the Purple People Eaters, and they got to Rodgers, they sacked him, and Steven came up with the fumble as they forced the fumble by Rodgers. He fumbled it 3 times in this game, losing this one in the clutch moment in the fourth quarter. The other 2 were not lost, but this one was, and it was Minnesota's ball with the lead. They would have to give the ball back to the Packers, and this time it looks like, well, they got another chance. Will Rodgers make up for his mistake with the fumble off the sack? No, he's intercepted by Trey Waynes. Trey Waynes comes up with the interception. 2 fourth quarter turnovers for Aaron Rodgers forced by this Minnesota defense, and the Vikings hold on to win this one. What a crazy game. Who would have expected? I sure didn't see that coming. What a performance by the Vikings defense. And the Vikings do this without Adrian Peterson. Peterson left the game. He was injured. Initially, it looked pretty bad, but after the game, the word is it's not as bad as it looked, but we'll see. Supposedly, they're saying he's only going to be out for a week, even though it looked like he might be done for the year initially. So we'll find out in the next couple days exactly where that is at. But he really didn't do much in this game, and although, yeah, they didn't put up big numbers, but they got the victory. They got the W in their first game there in the new building. And Sam Bradford getting the win and setting the record for the most passing yards by a Viking quarterback in their first start. So, as a Viking. It's not his first start in the NFL, but just as a Viking for this franchise. He was 22 for 31, 286 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Peterson just 12 carries for just 19 yards. It's not much production there. Not much production on the ground, period, out of that Minnesota rushing attack. And then Stephon Diggs, though, he was producing, as he was the one that put up most of the offense with 9 catches for 182 yards for Stephon Diggs. And he also, of course, had that touchdown. And Thielen had 4 catches for 41 yards, and Rudolph with 3 catches for 31 yards and a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers, 20 of 36, 213 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception for the Packers. Eddie Lacy was the game's leading rusher with 12 carries for 50 yards. Rodgers also had 29 rushing yards off of 3 carries, including that 10-yard touchdown run early there in the 4th. And then Jordy Nelson, 5 catches, 73 yards, and a touchdown. Randall Cobb, 5 catches, 42 yards. Then we look at the defense for these two teams. Minnesota, their defense was playing prime time, big time, stepping up under the lights with the whole nation watching. Joseph with the sack. Hunter had a sack as well. Griffin had a sack. Robeson had a sack. And Johnson had a sack. And the interception by Trey Waynes there in the 4th quarter really sealed the deal. But, of course, those forced fumbles as well. Hunter, Kendricks, Griffin, and Robeson all forcing fumbles. And, of course, Steven with that fumble recovery there in the 4th. And then the interception by Waynes, as I said earlier, as that defense was clutch. They really came up big in the moments when it really mattered most. For the Packers, they had a forced fumble. Gunter had a forced fumble. Daniels and Matthews each had sacks, and Julius Peppers had 1.5 sacks. Perry had a half sack. The Packers actually had more first downs, 20 to 15. And on 3rd down, the Packers 6 of 13, 46%. The Vikings just 4 for 14, 28%. On 4th down, the Packers were 0 for 1. The Vikings 1 for 2, 50%. Total net yards 284 for the Vikings to 263 for the Packers. On the ground, the Packers netted 83 versus 30 yards netted for the Vikings, as the Packers averaged 3.6 yards per rushing play, just 1.4 rushing yards per play for the Vikings. And then we look at the passing, 254 netted for the Vikings versus 180. A lot of sacks in this game, is Bradford feeling the pressure from the Packers, sacked 4 times, losing 32 yards, and Rodgers sacked 5 times by the Vikings for a loss of 33 yards total. And the penalties in this game, the Vikings, they were heavily penalized. 13 penalties, 137 yards, more than twice as many than the Packers, as they were penalized 6 times, 72 yards. But the turnovers, 4 fumbles for the Packers, 3 by Rodgers. 2 of those fumbles were lost. 1 of Rodgers' fumbles was lost. And then the 2 fumbles for Minnesota, 1 recovered, 1 lost. And then we look at the red zone, 2 for 3 for the Packers, 1 for 1 for the Vikings. So 66% for Green Bay, 100% for Minnesota. And the time of possession, 30 minutes, 18 seconds to 29 minutes, 42 seconds, about as close as it gets. And this game was about as close as it gets. It came down to the wire. Even with the mistakes by the Packers, the Vikings still gave them chances, as their offense didn't do a lot. It did enough, but they couldn't get anything going on the ground. The Packers just shut down that ground game. Of course, as I said, Peterson did leave to injury, but even before he left to injury, he was barely doing anything. He was not producing at all in this game. Whether he was on the field or off, he was about the same difference. The only difference is when he's on the field, you got to pay attention to him, whereas when he's off the field, not so much. I mean, I guess you pay attention to see if he's coming back on, but once you see he goes off the locker room, that's all she wrote. The Vikings defense, though, they carried the day. They kept the Vikings in this game, and they were able to get that lead, and once they did, the Vikings refused to relinquish that lead against one of the best quarterbacks to lace up those cleats, and Aaron Rodgers, is they made him look mediocre in this game, something that is very rare. As I said, Rodgers, in my opinion, is a future Hall of Famer, and for those Vikings to shut him down the way they did and to force those 4th quarter turnovers, that is huge. That's a big, big performance by that defense. and that goes a long way towards the Vikings are really looking solid towards making a run for this NFC North title. And to get a win against the Packers in division, it is in Minnesota, but this is a game you have to win if you want to be the division champs. As far as Minnesota is concerned, being it's at home, if you want to win the division title, you can't lose home games against division rivals. And so they took a first step towards that goal. They're 2-0. It's another good sign for them. The Packers, on their side, they're still right in the thick of things. They just have to avenge this loss when the game goes to Green Bay and when it's in Lambeau Field, and we'll see what happens then. I have a feeling it's not going to go quite the way it went right here. Not saying either way, but I doubt we'll see a 17-14 game. It's probably going to be a little bit different game there in Lambeau. But as for now, though, Minnesota looking really good. Like I said, they took that first step. Now the Packers, they're still fine, but they're just going to have to adjust, and nobody makes better adjustments than the Packers, as we've seen in the past, that they are always going to be in the thick of things, and they're always going to be competitive as long as Rodgers is under center. But still, you got to give credit, like I said, to that Viking defense. They really stepped up big time in prime time. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions, whether you agree or disagree. Let me know which plays and performances stuck out to you. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.